Welcome back. My name is David Tan. In Module 3, Psychological Analysis of Unsafe Practices, I will be focusing on the psychological factors that contribute to the development of unsafe behaviors, with particular emphasis on how repeated successful deviations from established procedures may gradually lead to misplaced confidence. This concept forms an important element of the Human Behavioural Classification Model for Unsafe Acts, as it provides insight into why individuals may continue engaging in unsafe practices despite having awareness of potential hazards and associated risks. 3.1 Psychological Development of Unsafe Practices: The Formation of Misplaced Confidence. Unsafe practices do not always result in immediate negative consequences. In many workplace situations, individuals may perform tasks incorrectly, bypass safety requirements, or accept deviations from established procedures without experiencing an incident. This absence of immediate consequences can create a dangerous psychological process in which individuals gradually perceive the unsafe practice as acceptable. The development of unsafe practices may be described as follows. Stage 1. Unsafe practice. An individual performs a task using a method that does not fully comply with the required safety standard or established procedure. Stage 2. No immediate negative outcome. The unsafe action does not immediately result in injury, damage, or operational failure. Stage 3. Reduced risk perception. The individual begins to perceive the activity as less hazardous based on previous successful experiences. Stage 4. Increased confidence in unsafe practice. The individual develops greater confidence in the unsafe method, despite the continued presence of the underlying hazard. Stage 5. Repeated unsafe behavior. The behavior is repeated and becomes increasingly accepted as a normal method of performing the task. Stage 6. Increased probability of incident. The unsafe practice eventually encounters circumstances that result in an adverse event. 3.1.1 Unsafe practice. An unsafe practice begins when an individual performs a task in a manner that deviates from the intended safe method. The deviation may occur due to personal judgment, convenience, operational pressure, inadequate controls, or workplace culture. At this stage, the individual may recognize that the practice is not fully compliant with the expected safety requirement. However, the behavior is often justified by perceived benefits such as saving time, reducing effort, or completing the task more efficiently. Examples include entering a confined space without conducting atmospheric testing, operating equipment without wearing required personal protective equipment, bypassing a machine guard to speed up production, performing a chemical transfer without completing all required preparation steps. The individual's internal reasoning may be, "This is not the safest method, but it is quicker and manageable." 3.1.2 No immediate negative outcome. The absence of an immediate incident creates a powerful psychological reinforcement. When an unsafe practice does not result in injury, damage, or failure, the individual receives feedback that the behavior appears to be successful. The brain naturally learns from outcomes. If an action produces the desired result without an obvious negative consequence, the behavior becomes more likely to be repeated. For example, a worker enters a confined space without gas testing and completes the task successfully. Since no harmful event occurs, the worker may interpret the outcome as evidence that the precaution was unnecessary. The individual may begin to think, "I have done this before, and nothing happened." However, the absence of an incident does not mean the absence of risk. The hazard remains present, only the harmful outcome has not occurred. 3.1.3 Risk perception decreases. Repeated exposure to unsafe practices without negative consequences gradually changes how individuals perceive risk. Risk perception is influenced not only by technical information but also by personal experience. When personal experience conflicts with safety warnings, people often place greater importance on their own observations. The psychological shift is initial belief, "This activity may be dangerous," becomes, "This activity is probably safe because I have done it many times." The individual begins to underestimate the likelihood of failure, the severity of possible consequences, The importance of preventive controls. This creates a gap between actual risk and perceived risk. The person feels safer, but the workplace condition has not become safer. 3.1.4. Confidence in unsafe practice increases. As risk perception decreases, confidence in the unsafe practice increases. The individual begins to believe that personal experience and familiarity provide sufficient protection. This is known as misplaced confidence. Misplaced confidence is a condition where an individual's confidence level exceeds the actual level of safety associated with the behavior. The psychological belief becomes, "I know what I am doing. I have done this many times. If it was dangerous, something would have happened already." This confidence is misleading because it is based on previous outcomes rather than an accurate evaluation of the hazard. 3.1.5. Repeated unsafe behavior. Increased confidence reinforces the unsafe practice, making repetition more likely. The behavior gradually becomes normalized and may spread among other workers. At this stage, the unsafe practice may transform from an individual choice into an accepted workplace practice. The progression becomes individual unsafe practice. A single person adopts an unsafe method. Repeated successful experience. The person continues the behavior without experiencing negative consequences. Personal acceptance. The individual considers the practice reasonable and acceptable. Workplace acceptance. Others observe and adopt the same behavior. Normalized unsafe practice. The unsafe method becomes regarded as an ordinary way of performing the task. For example, a worker initially removes a safety step to save time. After completing the task successfully several times, other workers observe the behavior and begin doing the same thing. Eventually, the unsafe method becomes considered the normal way of working. 3.1.6. Higher probability of incident. An incident may eventually occur when the unsafe practice encounters changed circumstances or additional contributing factors. The previous success of the unsafe behavior may create a false belief that the method is reliable. However, the risk existed from the beginning, and the absence of previous incidents does not eliminate the hazard. Factors that may contribute to an incident include equipment deterioration, increased workload or operational pressure, changes in environmental conditions, different materials or substances being used, human fatigue, unexpected system failures. The incident does not occur because the unsafe practice suddenly becomes dangerous. Rather, the existing risk eventually combines with circumstances that allow the harmful consequence to occur. 3.2 Safety management implication. The greatest challenge in managing unsafe practices is that successful unsafe behavior can be highly reinforcing. A person may not continue an unsafe practice because they disregard safety. They may continue because their previous experience has incorrectly taught them that the behavior is acceptable. Therefore, effective safety management must not wait for an incident to prove that a practice is unsafe. Organizations must identify and correct unsafe behaviors before experience creates misplaced confidence. This concept also explains why accepted deviations in your Human Behavioural Classification Model are particularly dangerous. They represent unsafe practices that have survived long enough to become psychologically acceptable. Thank you for completing Module 3, Psychological Analysis of Unsafe Practices. I appreciate your participation and attention throughout this module. Please proceed to Module 4, The Philosophy of Fetching Concrete Evidence, where we will examine the importance of obtaining objective, factual, and verifiable evidence to support effective investigation, analysis, and decision-making.